30 feet. That's the buffer left between Lake Powell's water and the elevation where Glen Canyon Dam's turbines stop making electricity at all. Look at the canyon walls around this reservoir and you'll see it before anyone tells you. A pale, bleached band of rock running for miles above the current waterline, stained by decades of water that used to sit there and doesn't anymore. Boaters call it the bathtub ring. In some stretches of the canyon, that ring is taller than a 10-story building. Mariners here have spent years chasing the water downhill. As of this month, 0 of Lake Powell's 12 public boat ramps are fully open, not reduced access. 0. Bullfrog Marina, one of the lake's biggest, is in the middle of physically moving itself 3 miles south toward deeper water. Tugboats nudging entire floating docks along at 1 mile an hour. A job that takes over a month and costs tens of millions of dollars once the new permanent ramp gets built. It's a different lake now, says Bullfrog's director, Captain Titus Crawford, watching boats squeeze through canyon passages that used to be wide open, walls rising 110 feet on either side, striped the whole way up with the same bleached ring. None of that is new exactly. What's new is how little room is left before the story stops being about ramps and starts being about the dam itself. 30 feet is what's left underneath it. Does 30 feet actually sound like a lot to you, standing next to a stain that tall? It shouldn't. Full pool sits at roughly 3,700 feet, meaning this reservoir has already fallen about 180 feet from the top of that ring. 30 more is the last stretch of a fall that started decades ago, not a fresh drop. Not when you learn what's sitting at the bottom of that 30-foot gap. 8 steel intake pipes, each wide enough to drive a school bus through, sit fixed at 3,470 feet above sea level, bolted into the canyon wall, unmovable, exactly where engineers put them in the 1960s. Reclamation set the cutoff for safe operation 20 feet above that, at 3,490 feet, and the reason has nothing to do with running out of water. It's physics. As a reservoir gets shallow near a drain, the water doesn't just flow into it anymore, it spins, the same swirl you've seen in an almost empty sink, except here it pulls air straight down with it. Force that air-water mix through a turbine built to run on pure, steady pressure, and you get cavitation. Vapor bubbles collapsing violently against steel, chewing blades meant to last decades into scrap in months. So why not just keep running the turbines anyway and deal with the damage later? Because later means replacing machinery that takes years to manufacture and install. On a dam this country's grid can't afford to lose twice. The 20-foot cushion isn't caution. It's the difference between shutting a dam down on purpose and destroying it by accident. Lake Powell's surface sat at 3,519.91 feet on August 16th, the lowest this reservoir has measured since it started filling, nudging past the old record by about 1/100th of a foot. Officials themselves note that number could still be revised. It's that close. Subtract the math yourself. That's roughly 30 feet above the line where Glen Canyon's turbines have to stop. And the Bureau of Reclamation's own outlook puts the lake there as soon as March of 2027, sooner than most of the operating rules currently governing this river even last, since those rules expire at the end of this year with no replacement finalized yet. You've probably never thought about the fact that a set of federal water rules quietly expiring could matter more to your power bill than a heat wave. It might. Those rules currently govern how Powell and Meade are operated together. When to hold water back upstream, when to release it, how the two reservoirs share the burden of a shrinking river between them. Right now, there's no finalized replacement. 7 states have to agree on new terms before the old ones run out, and 7 states agreeing quickly on anything involving water has never once been this river's strong suit. So has this always been this fragile, or is something newer going on? Neither exactly. Glen Canyon's power output has already averaged 17% below its pre-drought baseline for over 2 decades running. This isn't new stress on an otherwise healthy system, it's the same slow bleed, just finally close enough to the bottom to matter. Put that in machine terms. Each of the dam's 8 generators was built to put out 165 megawatts, running at full pool. Today, each one manages closer to 100. Not one generator down. All 8 quietly running at roughly 2/3 strength for years before this month's record even happened. The Bureau of Reclamation's own Hydropower staff have said 2024 ranks among the lowest generation years on record. Worse than nearly every year since the 1960s, with only 2022 coming close. Jerry Wilhite at the Western Area Power Administration put it more bluntly than most federal officials do on the record. This may be the new permanent. Not a drought that ends, a baseline that moved. If that sentence sounds familiar, it should. This is the same river system, one reservoir upstream, from the Lake Mead story this channel already told you. Powell fills first. Whatever doesn't make it past this dam is what Mead has to live without down the line. Same crisis, different pressure gauge. So does the water stop the moment the power does? No. And credit where it's due here. Even below 3,490 feet, Glen Canyon can still push water downstream through its river outlet works, separate tunnels built specifically as a backup route that don't depend on the turbines at all. Reclamation has never had to rely on those tunnels as the dam's primary water delivery method for months or years at a stretch, though, which means nobody knows for certain how they'd perform under that kind of sustained load. But what's underneath even that backup? A second, deeper line most people confuse with the first. Dead pool at 3,370 feet, the point where no water moves through the dam at all by any route. That's still roughly 150 feet down from where the lake sits today. Not imminent, but it's the same shape as everything else on this river right now. The emergency backup has its own backup, and everyone's hoping they never have to test either one for real. 2 thresholds, 1 reservoir, neither one designed with much room to spare for the other. So who actually answers for a number that's shrinking on a map most people never bother to look at? Roughly 5 million customers across 7 states draw power tied to Glen Canyon: Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, and Nebraska, through the Western Area Power Administration's federal contracts at a rate that's historically run around $30 per megawatt hour. Why does losing hydropower cost so much more than just switching to a different source? Because a dam has no fuel bill to begin with, no coal train, no gas pipeline, nothing that spikes with the weather. Replace it on the open market and the going rate right now runs $60 to $200 per megawatt hour, spiking past $1,000 during the 2000 energy crisis. Losing cheap hydropower doesn't just remove electricity from the grid. It removes the cheapest electricity on the grid and replaces it with whatever's left. In Colorado alone, that shortfall has already pushed rates up by roughly 7%, spread across utilities as different as Denver area cooperatives and small mountain town providers who never expected to be exposed to a Utah reservoir's water level. So if it's not just small desert towns absorbing this, who else is on the hook? Holy Cross Energy serves about 47,000 customers in the Aspen corridor. Aspen itself, along with Vail, Glenwood Springs, and the smaller towns strung along that stretch of Colorado mountains. This isn't the image most people picture when they hear rural utility customer facing a rate hike. Ski towns, resort economies, some of the priciest real estate in the country. And still, a slice of their power comes from the same federal hydropower contract every other CRSP customer depends on, and it's shrinking exactly like everyone else's. A reservoir 600 miles away in the Utah desert doesn't check your zip code before it drops. They're not alone on that list either. The Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute tribes draw on the same shrinking federal allocation. So does Tri-State Generation, the wholesale supplier behind a wide stretch of rural Colorado co-ops that have nothing in common with a ski resort, except the same line item on a power bill. That's the part worth sitting with for a second. This isn't only a story about small desert towns living paycheck to paycheck on cheap federal power, though it is that too. Plenty of other CRSP customers fit that description exactly. It's also proof that when a shared resource this size starts running out, the exposure doesn't stay contained to whoever seems most vulnerable on paper. A lot of you are already asking, isn't this really about AI? In Wyoming, one of the 7 states actually buying Glen Canyon Power, that's not a hypothetical. A single joint venture between Crusoe and Tallgrass has proposed a data center campus starting at 1,800 megawatts and scaling toward 10,000. Wyoming's entire existing generation capacity, every power plant in the state combined, is about 10,200 megawatts. One proposed project is chasing a number close to the whole state's current output. That demand doesn't pull water from Lake Powell. It pulls power from the same regional grid Glen Canyon feeds into, the same grid that's about to have less cheap hydropower to offer, right as new buyers show up asking for more of it than the state currently uses in total. A second developer, Prometheus Hyperscale, is separately proposing another 1,200 megawatts for southwest Wyoming on top of that first project, not instead of it. Wyoming's own Public Service Commission hasn't figured out who pays for that collision yet. One way or the other, it all has to be sorted out so that costs get allocated to the causer, Deputy Chairman Chris Petrie has said, and it's a super complicated, involved affair. State Representative Christopher Knapp put the same problem more bluntly. How chaotic can this get? Eventually it's going to affect every region. Nobody's answered that question yet. The data centers aren't waiting for an answer before they start building. Circle back to that 100th of a foot for a second, the margin by which August 16th technically broke a record that was already sitting at rock bottom. On its own, 100th of a foot is nothing. Standing next to a 20-foot cavitation cushion, a March 2027 forecast, expiring federal guidelines, and a data center boom asking for more power than an entire state currently generates, it stops looking like nothing and starts looking like where 4 separate countdowns happen to intersect. None of those 4 things caused the others. They're not even being managed by the same office. They're just all arriving at the same reservoir in the same year, and none of them are waiting for the others to finish first. Officials might still revise that 100th of a foot record downward next week. That's fine. It was never the number that mattered. The number that matters hasn't moved. 30 feet, closing. Holy Cross Energy isn't shutting off Aspen's lights next month. Nobody in Cheyenne is losing power tomorrow because of a data center that hasn't broken ground. That's not the claim here. The claim is smaller and, honestly, harder to ignore. The cushion underneath all of it is 30 feet, on a river that's been losing ground for 2 decades straight, with the rulebook governing how it's managed set to run out before the buffer does. 30 feet used to sound like plenty. It sounded like plenty right up until this channel told you the exact same thing about a different dam, on the exact same river, a few feet at a time, video after video. If Glen Canyon's turbines do go quiet, there won't be a siren. There won't be a countdown clock on the news. There'll be a line item, on a bill, in a town most of the country couldn't find on a map. The same way it always goes, on this river, on every dam this channel has covered so far. Subscribe if you want to know which reservoir hits its own version of 30 feet next, because on this river there's always another one coming up behind it.